Okay, buddy, let's talk about something that most men avoid, at least not allowed. You've most likely been instructed to be the man with a plan, the provider, the protector, and yes, all of that. Important. But the reality is that she doesn't always stay with what attracts her attention. Emotionally captivated, it's not only beauty, charm, or strength. Deeper, something more subdued, something she refuses to acknowledge, even to herself. Since although women are frequently considered emotionally complicated, there are actually hidden triggers and weaknesses. Most men totally ignore them, and you chase after them when you should. You offer when you should, and you explain when you should. Remain motionless, pull away, and she does so not because you weren't sufficient, but when you learn to move differently, when you stop reacting, and because you gave too much of the incorrect thing. Begin observing. The transformation occurs when you cease proving and begin embodying. You turn into the man when she begins to feel something she can't express. We're going to break down who no longer needs to chase, because you've become the norm in this video. 10 of the psychological switches that women overlook the most. These are not surface-level tactics, are actually deep emotional patterns that you stop guessing once you grasp. Quiet power talks louder than any pickup, so stop negotiating and start leading. As a result, if you've ever thought you were doing everything correctly, but if you've ever seen her lose, you're still in the red. Interest. The instant you become more concerned, or if you've ever pondered why some men make a lasting impression even when they hardly try. This is your wake-up call, so let's get the one emotion she wants to conceal, but is unable to do so around you, is number 1. She'll chuckle, dismiss it, and pretend that she's untouched. But most women experience a particular feeling when they are around a particular type of man, regardless of how composed, self-assured, or the unwavering man. Why consistency makes you unstoppable. She seems in charge and is unable to conceal it. It's uncertainty. I'm referring about that internal change, not anarchy. She believes that when you enter a room, you should talk purposefully and without attempting to prove anything. She doesn't sure exactly where she stands when she sees you, and realizes she can't read you, and that she is unable to break free from the emotional current that is created by the fact that most males are too blatant, wear everything on their sleeves. They text too quickly and offer too many compliments. Women read them in a matter of minutes because they know exactly what they need to be loved before they are even respected. What's to come? No mystery, no stress, duality, but the man who is composed around him and doesn't hurry, doesn't pursue, doesn't over-explain. Instead, he evokes an emotion that she can't quite describe. It's not dread, not a lack of confidence, but rather that faintly persistent inquiry in the back of her mind. Why do? That's where the emotional tension starts, and I want to know what he's thinking. The truth is that she tries to hide it by diverting her attention with quick scroll talk, alter the topic. Yet her body betrays her by leaning in more than normal. She slows down without noticing as she observes your reactions, as a result of you upsetting her emotional autopilot and causing her to feel anything she didn't intend to feel. And for women who are accustomed to controlling the dialogue, the atmosphere, and the dynamics, that she covers it because emotion takes them by surprise. The secret to unlocking her attraction is confidence, because she's controlling, but also because she's not controlling the experience for the first time in a long time. So let me be, evidently, being cruel, withholding, or playing games doesn't cause this. From realizing that you only need to be grounded to establish a connection. You don't need to amuse, impress, or chase. A woman's only option when a man is rooted, and his energy doesn't increase with compliments or decrease with rejection, is to feeling herself in his company is the change, and the only feeling she is unable to. Keep your distance, because most ladies don't believe what they see. When they are around a man, they fall for his self-perception. Additionally, she feels most uneasy when your energy is steady, calm, and centered. Why do I want more of him, even though you haven't done anything? She asks. Even though you haven't disclosed your cards, you haven't stated anything more, rather than a few words. As strength doesn't always communicate, she senses it when it's genuine. Let's introduce some Stoicism now. Seneca stated, without referring to force, the greatest power is often simple presence. He spoke of being composed, undistracted, and unmoved. And that's just what he meant. The type of presence that evokes the feeling she is trying to repress. You're offering her something she doesn't typically see in men, not because you're making her feel insecure, who is obvious, but now but eager, present, but not rushing to open. Her energy alters when she performs, which is what makes her wonder, why does she respond to you on the inside, even though she doesn't say anything on the outside? Therefore, if you've ever observed a change in her conduct where she became ambition, the reasons women attract goal-setting men, a little slower, a little quieter, and perhaps even a little confused by it wasn't about what you said. You could see the emotion she couldn't conceal. It was about your state. And if you're entering that condition right now, you're not attempting to be enigmatic. Rather, you're just refusing to be. Rective. Please leave this in the comments. I'm the one who's silent because the man who's not has to demonstrate that he is the one who divulges all without speaking. Second, it's not your appearance that is the reason behind her mute fixation with emotional presence. It's not your career, your attractiveness, your vehicle, or the quantity of books you own. See what bothers her and what she can't seem to get rid of despite her best efforts. Most men believe that attraction is based on your emotional presence, so they choose to disregard it, discussing taking action and putting in effort. But the reality is that a woman feels the moment your energy says, I'm here, I'm grounded, and I'm not trying to, and before she ever hears your voice. See, women live in the emotional realm. It speaks louder than words could. Realm, they are always listening for clues in your posture, tone, responses, and stillness. The man who is completely present, undistracted, and aware of the subtle, without saying a word, one becomes magnetic since emotional presence isn't about intensity. It's about being really present and not being drawn into it. Not about trying to be deep or peering into her soul. The bad boy. Why she is captivated by a little mystery. Your brain isn't working merely. You'd be shocked to learn how uncommon it is. The majority of males aren't actually there. They are planning what to say, expecting, and reacting. Women can sense that they are looking for her approval next, even if you may believe that you are concealing it. But a man who doesn't flinch when she becomes upset and doesn't try to match her attitude isn't. That man is uneasy in solitude and feels like a rock in, whether she acknowledges it or not. That rock in the midst of chaos is precisely, here's why she wants to rely on you when you're emotionally present. She feels noticed without having to put on a show. She doesn't have to act in a particular manner in order to. She doesn't need to guess which version of you will be the focus of her attention, because you have calm, steady energy that doesn't waver. Helps her feel secure, not physically protected, safe to be feminine. Her guard comes down when she decides to relax and stop trying to manage every situation. Her voice becomes slower at that point, and she begins responding to you with respect rather than opposition, because you're not needy or there to get approval when you're emotionally present. That changes because you decide to be there rather than because you have to be. You are now more than just a man she converses with. You are a place she enters. Beat. She connects with an energy that she returns to even when she doesn't. Understand why focusing on presence involves letting go of results. Let's dive even deeper. Now that you're not responding to her, you're not concerned about what she might think. You simply become conscious of them. And in doing so, you become her emotional mirror rather than her emotional puppet. She feels comfortable because you didn't break down when she became cold, not because you instructed her to. Pursuit. You didn't attempt to fill the void when she withdrew. That contrast is striking because you remained yourself while letting her be. Most guys either go too far or retreat. They make an excessive effort to connect, or they ghost entirely. But with an emotional presence, it observes without. It retains the moment no matter how weighty it is, and it listens without interjecting. Receives. And ladies become fixated on it because it's uncommon and genuine. Because you are the man who is already full in a society where men are constantly vying for things. And once you're full, you're extending stability rather than pursuing love. Let's return to, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much. Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher, stated, as we converse, presence is paying attention to her words as well as her energy, and upon realizing that you can view her without losing yourself in her, she remembers it. Therefore, if you're learning to avoid responding, slow down so she can approach you while you keep true to yourself, and write this in the comments I select. Presence. Because the man who draws her in doesn't have to try to woo her. Number 3, how your absence makes her crave approval. Let me ask you a question without ever raising his voice. Have you ever been quiet to preserve your peace, not out of animosity, or to play games, and then all of a sudden she begins contacting people once more? That's not a coincidence. That's not random. See the power of absence when you're always present and always providing explanations. Checking in makes you predictable, and most women find that predictability progressively kills them. Interest. But as soon as you step back, her brain stops being performative, begins to work extra hours, because she has no idea how you're feeling or what you're thinking. Determine whether she still has your interest, and that uncertainty is what flips the switch. Your silence suddenly overpowers any message. Does she? Whether she realizes it or not, she begins to yearn for the answer to a question she never even knew she had. Am I still important? That's when your absence doesn't simply register. It reverberates in his mind. However, most men make the mistake of they attempt to establish distance as a technique, believing that pulling back is about forcing her to chase them. Ignored attention. How to raise your value by using scarcity. They pretend to be aloof in an attempt to attract her attention, but that isn't the point. Here, we're discussing the type of absence that results from a man who has at last found his core and is no anymore. Performing without attempting to mend what wasn't damaged, a man who leaves without to rile her up, but to get back to himself. That clear split from the true cause of this problem is neediness, from overexerting, from emotional pursuit. Change in her, as she is now the one who is uncertain and begins to question whether you still care. And ironically, that ambiguity causes her to somewhat consider your worth. This is the reason why, even though you were always available, she had a mirror before her, but she wasn't paying any attention to it because she was too busy testing her reactions and assuming you'd constantly present. But when the mirror vanishes and the reflection is gone, she begins to probe farther. And that's when she begins. She stays on your stories for just long enough for you to see her skimming through your old messages. Observe that at that point, the unintentional texts, casual likes, or inquiries start to surface, which appear innocuous, but are actually only taking your emotional temperature, because this is the truth. The majority of women won't acknowledge that they want more than they want to know that they can still affect you. And when you give them less of that feedback loop so they can regain it, her need for approval arises at this point. Not because she is shallow, because she's cunning, but also because she's human, and your absence disrupted her rhythm, cozy dancing to. And that's where you don't have the authority to discipline her in disregarding her out of self-interest, but understanding that sometimes quiet teaching. Let's anchor this in Stoicism, which speaks louder than words ever could. You have power over your mind, not outside of it. Stated Marcus Aurelius. You will discover strength if you recognize this. Your absence isn't about regulating her conduct. It's about not letting go of your peace in order to cling to someone who hasn't earned it. Additionally, she may not like it when you ultimately decide that she feels it, but she respects it since you've simply quit putting forth your energy and aren't attempting to be enigmatic. Ironically, that's what makes her question whether you still matter. Therefore, if you've reached a stage where you're not attempting to justify your worth or seeking clarification from someone who was unable to meet you in person, sent a comment saying, "I chose distance since the man who..." She keeps a closer eye on the person who leaves without asking for attention than previously. Number 4's masculine composure caused her to emotionally crumble. She has the ability to roll her eyes, raise her voice, and use words to question you, that bite or withdraw into quiet, that challenges you to pursue. Yet when you encounter everyone, when something masculine calms her down, she starts to collapse, not in defeat, but in weakness, but in submission, because the fact she refuses to speak out is that most women are used to. They escalate and withdraw because they are accustomed to being the emotional thermostat. They set the tone for the conversation, and the majority of the guys they follow mimic her energy. They respond, defend, justify, or become agitated in an attempt to regain her tenderness. But the man who doesn't need to prove anything and doesn't rise to that pandemonium, who maintains composure in the face of intense emotion. When the discussion feels that man's instability drastically disrupts her routine because she is now unaware how to handle your silence. She has no idea how to shake you. She has no idea how to guide the dialogue in which she is emotionally dominant. And in that state of bewilderment, she softens as what you're demonstrating to her is uncommon. You're not merely a man who, listen, you're a man who can verify his frame without her mood, manage the fire without becoming overwhelmed. And that gives her a sense of depth that surpasses attraction. It gives her a sense of security, not in a superficial sense, but in a way that allows, because of something that most men don't realize, women don't reveal themselves to, booming assurance. She becomes quietly secure and lets go of the man who doesn't get sucked into her storms, but rather because of the peace you provided, she collapses. Pre-selection, the influence of other women's desire, permission to quit making such a great effort to remain vigilant, and to be clear about this, isn't passive. You're not chilly or disengaged. You're just not available for emotional support. You simply don't commit your energy to anything that drags you out of turmoil. You don't shut down. Her calmness, self-control, and lack of emotional neediness. What change her from defense to desire? Since you're not attempting to change the game now that you're not playing it, her feelings, but instead of pleading with her to comprehend you, you're just standing motionless. She senses that you are entrenched in your tranquility and your ideals. Let's put this in practical terms. May attack you with heat and try your patience, tone, and quiet. Additionally, there is a contrast when you hesitate before speaking and lower your voice rather than raising it, and you don't respond, causes an unexpected shock to her nervous system, and she recalls, because you are now more than simply a guy. You are a presence and a space. You are a motionless mirror, and when a lady encounters a motionless mirror, move. She starts to recognize herself and starts to have faith in the silence, and that trust leads to surrender. Let's firmly establish this. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it. Epictetus once said, demonstrating stoicism is that counts. Your composure is a kind of power, not because it makes her quiet, but because it first silences you, preventing you from acting out of pride, fear, or insecurity. And when she observes that you maintain your self-control in all circumstances without faltering, she throws a storm and begins to feel something she can't explain, a pull toward you that is no longer motivated by desire, but rather by respect for safety. So, if you're done raising your voice and reacting to turmoil, then give up. Writing this in the comments I lead with in an attempt to get her attention by losing your center. Calm. Because the person who avoids emotional conflict wins by staying out of the number 5 on the battlefield at all times. She leans in when she senses you don't need her. Let's face it, brother, most men were brought up to think that the more you give, the better. The more she will remain if you demonstrate your dedication, loyalty, and she will finally realize how valuable you are. But here's what actually occurs. The relationship changes when she realizes you need her more than she needs you, and not. It puts pressure on her, which works in your advantage. In her heart, she doesn't want it, and it makes her feel accountable for your emotional equilibrium, to be the source of your tranquility. She desires to be drawn to your tranquility without her. Something subtle cracks when a woman senses that you are emotionally dependent on her. It's not that she lacks compassion, but the burden of being your source isn't romantic, draining, like pressure cloaked in love. But when she senses that you don't need her, it's not an epitoha. Frigid, disdainful manner, but in a very grounded sense. I'm whole nevertheless. She feels a change in energy and begins to lean in as your time feels chosen rather than obligated. Attention feels like a gift rather than a grasp. And your presence, it gains value since it is no longer assured. You observe others pursuing what they are unable to fully safeguard you. And when you cease indicating that you are always emotionally available, attempting to provide comfort in the midst of stillness, when you no longer require her approval to prove your value, you become the contradiction is that she wants to solve the enigma once more. She begins to think about you more, the less you need her. Not because you're playing games, but the fundamental fact is that your self-sufficiency makes you fascinating. Women don't want to be everything to men. Instead, they want to feel like they have earned a spot in an already full existence. And when you cease using her as your emotional project, when you're just going about your life, with or without her, she starts to question why you're looking for her for fulfillment. Why do I want to return when he isn't requesting that I stay? And is he okay without me? When the leaning occurs, does his remoteness feel heavier than my presence? Masculinity, the reasons women seek men with strong emotions, starts to reply more quickly, listens more intently, and makes a greater effort, but quietly. Not with words, but with softness and vitality, with initiative, with a pull that she finds difficult to describe. And the secret is this: works when it's genuine. You're not acting or feigning detachment to be occupied. You're truly focused on your goal. You have your own life, with or without her. You have places to be and are emotionally satisfied. Your attention becomes powerful once more because of that. Not because you stop giving it, but because it's no longer. Let's introduce Stoicism. Cheap Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A happy life requires little more than you and your own methods of believing that you already have everything you need and aren't waiting for her to affirm your value. She doesn't lean in because you don't freely give her the space she wants back because of this. Ignore her. She leans in since you are the sun and no longer revolve around her. She senses that change more now that you glow, whether she is there or not, profoundly than any praise or word could ever convey. So if you're done attempting to demonstrate your worth, if you're choosing to be at peace, show her that you care by being forgiving. I don't need anything, so please leave this in the comments instead of pursuing validation, because she tries her hardest to avoid the man who is whole without her. Let's chat. Lose number 6. The silent power of being unavailable when it's needed. Regarding timing, not when to phone or text back, but something much more potent. The calculated silence, the well-timed absence. Most men believe that the silent power of being unavailable at the perfect time. Consistency is the ability to always be present, always respond, and always show up. Yes, and while availability without restrictions fosters a lack of consistency, apathy when she is aware that she can contact you at any time, any place, and under any circumstances. You become a background instead of a presence. Highlight: women crave what they feel, not what they can expect. And emotional effect is greatly influenced by timing. This is where it gets serious. It's not about ignoring her or vanishing to attract attention, about realizing that when people expect you're always available, your availability loses value. May possess the most alluring energy in the world, but she won't sense it if you reveal it. Every time she blinks, no longer. But if you master the art of purposeful unavailability, changes, she begins to observe the area. She begins to pay attention to while you're not there. And in contrast, your presence leaves a lasting impression. I'll give you an example once again. Let's imagine she's accustomed to you answering in a matter of minutes. One day, you don't. You're going forward with your life, not because you're punishing her, grounded. And she senses not only the quiet, but also the absence of follow-up. She doesn't receive an explanation of what happened, nor does she receive a, "Hey, sorry, just saw this." She experiences ambiguity and space silence throughout the day, and her ideas spiral not out of fear, but out of curiosity. Why hasn't he responded? Moving away. Did I say something? She'll review your message and scan her most recent one. Social, she will mentally recite your tone, and it has little to do with control. It is about mystery that arises from self-control, because emotional strength isn't loud, doesn't demand or plead. Instead, it lets stillness do the work, and the individual who realizes that he doesn't have to stop working altogether just knows when not to appear, often after stress or when things feel one-sided, especially when she's acting entitled. You don't have to defend yourself. You only need to leave the situation quietly. You don't have to explain. Leave that void, that rhythmic pause. It resets everything and serves as a reminder to her that you remind her that you have a choice over your time and that you don't belong to her feelings, not a duty. It serves as a reminder to her that life isn't waiting for. Attraction is rekindled at that point, since you're no longer just a man who is there. You are a man whose presence is significant because it has been earned. Let's make this a priority. If you're constantly stoic, Seneca observed, he who is everywhere is nowhere, available, always reachable, and always responsive. But your impact begins to diminish. You can send a message without saying anything when you learn to be choosy and intentionally unavailable without feeling guilty. In other words, I value my time more than I worry about your response. And that, my friend, is how to lead and get her to follow you with charismatic leadership. Felt profoundly emotionally. She won't express it, but she will change and appear. Gentler, she will listen more intently, not because you instructed her to. However, your timing showed her that if you're learning to stop being the man who's always a phone call away, put this in the comments section to intentionally create space and preserve your energy by pausing before acting. Respect my time. Like the man who vanishes with number 7. Why are you? Intention always comes back with more value than when he departed. Her favorite kind of attraction is self-respect. There's something unique about a man who values himself. It's in what he refuses to say, not in what he says. And it's not loud or spectacular. Tolerance, you see. Most men learn to be amiable. Say what's right, keep. Don't ruin her happiness. But here's what occurs when you living that way for too long. Even if she still likes you, she no longer respects you. Because a woman secretly dislikes a man who always agrees with her. The guy who has a line and sticks to it appeals to her. And that line, that border, that you don't compromise yourself to please her. That's what she recalls, that's how she feels. And it causes her to stop and ask, who is this guy that I'm unable to control? To put it simply, self-respect isn't about ego, about conceit. It's about how much you value your time. The importance you attach to your tranquility and your vitality. When she buzzpills, that genuinely senses it. Everything changes since you're no longer scared to. You're not scared to say no, and you're not scared of being misinterpreted if it entails remaining true to who you are. And that type of man doesn't. He doesn't beg or sacrifice his morals for anything. This is where it goes. Attention is scarce, and that rarity is magnetic. Deeper, the majority of men believe that performance is what attracts them. Be captivating, humorous, successful, but it lacks depth and becomes performative when all of it stems from a desire to be selected. When your behavior is motivated by self-respect and you stop bending to fit in, you become appealing. Without. When she sees that you're not even trying, she respects your quiet boundaries. At that point, she begins to question her own actions around you. Not because you disciplined her, because you made her feel guilty, but because your dignity helped her understand that you're not just any man, and that you're not playing her game. You're playing your own game, which is based on honesty, peace, and not having to be understood in order to maintain control. How does this manifest itself in real life? It appears as though you should leave when she treats you disrespectfully, without giving you any prior notice. Not responding to texts when the energy is low appears to be an act of clarity rather than ego, as if to say, I'm not acceptable with that. And without elaborating on the 6 various ways, here's the contradiction. She begins to wonder how much you value yourself the more. The more you hold her to your standards, the more she wants to live up to them. She feels more attracted to you the more you pick yourself, because that's the type of man she can't control and she can't forecast. Even if she acts differently, she can't help but respect that type of man. Let's bring in Marcus Aurelius. A Stoic writer once said, "Stop wasting time debating what a decent man should. Don't argue your borders or explain your value. Just be one." That's the code. Simply be the man who respects himself, even if it means losing the relationship, since this is what happens when she senses that you would sooner lose her than yourself. And even if she departs, she recalls she might not express it, but she will carry the perception of the man who maintained his position because he was sovereign, rather than because he was obstinate. Therefore, if you've had enough of overcompensating, over-explaining, and going out of your way to keep someone, emotional intelligence, the key to establishing a strong bond. If you're prepared to allow your standards take precedence over your words, please leave a comment below, because she respects the man who respects himself the most. Number 8. When she realizes you can walk, even if it means losing her. Every relationship, whether romantic or not, has a moment where everything changes, complex or vague, where everything abruptly changes. But it's not when you say just the right thing. But it's not until you ultimately win her over that observes you and understands that you may go. And you genuinely, would the entire game change at that point, because until then, she might have thought your allegiance was unwavering. She might have thought that, though. Of how she pretended that you would still arrive and make contact, stay, and the majority of men actually do. They cling on for too long and harbor hope, remain accessible, which provides her with something she doesn't even. When you get to that silent threshold, you understand she's relying on control, where she senses that tranquility takes precedence over attentiveness. It's not something you declare. Don't say I'm done. You just stop pursuing. You don't threaten to walk. Describing how her energy abruptly changes when you stop focusing on her reactions, because you just reclaimed your power without using any theatrical language. You reminded her without resentment that your life goes on, whether or not she approves of it, and that disturbs her, not because she desires to possess you, but rather because she anticipated that you would have to wait. However, you're letting her go now because you've finally learned not to discipline her, yours, instead of using distance to incite conflict. You're choosing self-respect above bewilderment, and that silent, last inward decision is what changes the dynamic. Is that you're no longer terrified of what she sees, losing her. And the man she begins to fear is the one who doesn't mind losing. Losing the power disparity ends at that point. And that's where, when actual polarity returns, you stop seeking connections and instead become the norm, since he's already in the loop. The man doesn't need to close it, shut the door. And to be clear, this only functions when it's genuine, when you've truly let go of attachment, and your tranquility isn't dependent on her reaction. It's not a strategy as a position that is based on the understanding that you would prefer to walk alone. In actuality, rather than continue doing something that devalues you, she must now sit, perhaps for the first time. She heard the echo in the area you used to occupy, understands that you weren't just another man trying to get picked. Rather, you were the one who already made your own decision. Let's connect this to Stoicism. Epictetus stated that freedom is the only worthwhile objective in life, and the purest kind of liberation is emotional separation from things that no longer fulfill your development. You leave with understanding rather than rage. Avoid closing the door as a kind of punishment. Rather, do so because it was costing you more to leave it open than it was to keep it open. She is rewired by the energy of silence, quiet leaving, and pushing forward without making noise. Total impression of you. Therefore, if you've reached the stage where your silence isn't a strategy but a proclamation, where your separation isn't resentment, but tranquility, where you can leave is a principle, not a feeling. So write this in the comments section. Because the man who can leave without turning around is strong. I move with. Number 9, and is the one thing she never has to chase after again. And the man who never has to admits forces her to acquiesce, and she will pretend she wants to communicate. Values openness. She will discuss lengthy chats regarding emotional connection, regarding the value of transparency, which she partially intends, but there's one thing. She will never publicly state something that subtly surpasses all of my lists of qualities I look for in a man. And it's when she senses your unwavering confidence, she automatically and intuitively submits. Not alpha, loud authority, dominance, or control. Pretending to have that deep, serene, unassailable insight within you that shows that I know who I am, I know what I value, and I don't bend for anything. Interests with a passion. Why your purpose and passion make you appealing. Approval. See, women live in a state of flux in their emotions, something that most men are unaware of. The ever-evolving emotional climate. They are flexible and adaptable, perceptive, and when she meets a man who is equally emotionally prone, as she is unable to unwind and cannot rely on him to guide her, she will not admit that she might not even be aware of it, but she will sense it and fight against it. However, when she encounters a man who's anchored, not aloof or unyielding, but clearing something inside of her, resolves the conflict, the performance, the tests, they all begin to fade. Not because you asked them to, submission, but because you provided a secure environment for her to relinquish authority. That is the appearance of genuine polarity. Masculine assurance produces the room for feminine submission. But once more, this is about being, not about coercion, so committed to your principles, your course, and your inner tranquility that she no longer needs to guide the dynamic. She is no longer required to drive and is not required to criticize every choice you make. She doesn't need to be emotionally tense all the time in order to feel connection, since she is now sensing you, anchored, serene, and unyielding. That's the spirit she will. Even if she doesn't understand it, she will relax into that presence. I'll provide you a comparison from the real world. If you're not sure about yourself, if your boundaries vary every time, your tone will continually change to fit her mood. When she puts them to the test, she can't rely on the frame. She'll test you farther, pull away out of uncertainty that she will maintain control, not disinterest, as she doesn't think you have any. But when you stand higher and say less, you maintain eye contact without flinching when you politely and sincerely say no. She feels a sense of regret, but she will never acknowledge it. Forces her to comply. She may initially contest it. She may attempt to gauge your tone. Your stillness is limited, but eventually her resistance is worn down by your serene assurance. Down because she understands that you're not playing, and there's nothing to fight. Games, you're not attempting to win her over, and you're not afraid that she'll leave. Let's ground this in the fact that a man does not crumble under pressure. Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius once remarked, if something is not true, don't do it. If it's wrong, don't do it. Don't say that. It's a manly certainty, not a dogma. Ego is really a silent inner compass, and when you follow it, you don't want to impress anyone. However, because of who you are, she feels comfortable lowering her defenses. The important thing to remember is that submission does not imply obedience. Implies tenderness, faith, and letting go of the never-ending need to exert control over, and she will only do so for a man she knows is unnecessary. The person who stands as he is, whether or not she understands, should do it if you no longer make an effort to persuade her, control her emotions, or win her approval. Instead, I've decided to make sure of who you are, so I'm holding my frame as you type this in the comments, because a leader who exudes calm assurance never needs to request when he gives her something more powerful than words to trust. Number 10, to master the transition. Submitting comes easily. From being selected to becoming the norm, the majority of men never understand until their hearts have been silently returned. For the majority of your life, you've been prepared to appear the part and speak the appropriate thing to demonstrate. You deserve her time, attention, and love, and perhaps you did all of that. You arrived, you provided more than you got, you made adjustments, and waited. But she continued to withdraw because she was bored, lost interest because you never made the cut, not because you weren't talented enough. Shift. You never gave up on being selected, and you never began to take on the role of standard C. Your entire world revolves on getting approval while you're waiting to be selected, and you obsess over every message. You give up your limits in an attempt to appease her. The man who becomes the standard doesn't wait for you to earn her comfort. He is the validation. He doesn't worry about being sufficient since he acts as though he already is. In conclusion, Bunny is too preoccupied with creating his own world to try to fit into hers. He is here to draw alignment that shifts, not to seek attention. Everything since she is now getting up to see you, and she begins to question if you don't need her because you're being difficult to get, rather. If you want to be truly confident, you should stop performing for individuals who haven't earned your truth. Starts not with grandiose declarations or flawless language, but in the calmly realizing that your life is rich, whether she chooses to or not. To be clear, this is about intentionality. You're not rejecting, not about apathy, connection. You're not emotionally cutting off. You're filtering for value, only in situations that are mutually respectful, safe, and ironic. Are you opening up? You become tough to deal with when you act like a man who doesn't need to be chosen. You're the metric now, so forget about it. The way you speak, the way you smile, the way you say no without flinching, the way you maintain eye contact, it all points to the same fundamental truth, that you are no longer here without requiring a response. You are here to represent everything you ever believed you had to prove anything. Epictetus remarked, "Let's bring this home with some stoicism. Know first who you are, and then dress appropriately." This is what you've ceased stretching, bending, and attempting to change into the version of yourself that she might desire. and you are now the only version of yourself that you need. A man who establishes the tone, a man who clarifies the standard, a man who is already selected and doesn't need to be chosen himself. Therefore, if you experienced that change and are finished with the game of approval and prepared to move as the person they recall, rather than the one who waits at that moment, I am the standard, not because you spoke it aloud. Keep this slogan with you, however, because you lived it in silence, and silence speaks louder than words ever could. Okay, buddy, if you've reached this point, it speaks something about, it indicates to me that you're not merely here to play tactics or obtain advice, because you're secretly sick of becoming smaller and sick of waiting to be sufficient. You're here because you're ready to stop attempting to fit into frames that weren't made for your strength. Transition from seeking to selecting, from demonstrating to knowing, from being a choice to be the one who keeps in mind all we discussed. These days, it's not about manipulating or emotionally unavailable women, nor is it about controlling them, recovering your power, the peaceful, steady power that comes from being alive. Stoicism is about having norms and adhering to them, not distancing oneself from emotion while maintaining discipline within it, without being aloof but transparent. Being entire with or without her, rather than unpurring, is what today's video offered. If it helped you realize who the hell you are, do this for yourself by subscribing to the channel, only for additional material, but to maintain ties to this spirit, this energy, this fraternity of individuals who will not, if something hits deep, don't just watch and announce it. Instead, type it out. Be more than just a video. Let it serve as a reset. I appreciate you viewing. I'll see you in the next one with the same enthusiasm. Today, you chose to do the quiet labor that most people shun. Truth until tomorrow. Keep your peace.